Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really significant subject. It's drawn from a document by John Pittle called Need for Your Participation in the Great Commission, Prioritizing the Unreached.
Right. And this isn't just, abstract theology. We're talking about billions of people.
Exactly. So our aim today is to unpack this whole concept of unreached people groups. We want to get a clearer picture, figure out where they are, and really understand the author's arguments for why they need, well, urgent attention.
Yeah, and the document itself, it's copyrighted 2016 by Advocates for the Unreached. It uses the NIV Bible, and Pitterl frames it very much within a specific faith context right from the start. That's kind of the lens here.
Good point. So our mission then is to really get our heads around these unreached people groups, understand the scale, like you said, billions, and the barriers they face. Why does the author think prioritizing them is so critical? Okay, so first things first, what exactly is an unreached people group?
Well, Pitterl uses some established definitions. It starts with the idea of a people group, basically, a large community sharing a common identity, affinity.
Okay, a shared identity.
Yeah. And then, specifically for evangelization, it's seen as the biggest possible group where a message, the Christian message in this case, could spread sort of naturally without hitting major walls in terms of understanding or cultural acceptance.
So it's like a sphere of natural communication based on culture and language.
Pretty much, yeah. Think of it like that. So an unreached people group takes that a step further. It's a group where there isn't already a viable indigenous community of believing Christians. They lack the numbers and the resources within their own group to effectively evangelize the rest of that group.
Ah, okay, so it's not just individuals who haven't heard, it's the whole group lacking that internal self-sustaining Christian community.
Exactly. They lack that internal capacity. It's about the community's resources, not just individual knowledge.
That clarifies things. It really highlights the communal aspect. Now, the scale you mentioned, it's huge, isn't it?
It really is. At the time Pitterl was writing, around 2016, the data suggested nearly 41% of all known people groups, that's like 6,649 groups, were considered unreached.
Wow.
And that adds up to over 3 billion people. What's really striking is what they lack access to. Disciples within their community, Bible-believing churches, missionaries who get their context, Bibles in their language, other basic gospel resources. It's a totally different picture of access than many people experience.
It really is a stark difference. It's almost hard to imagine, in our connected world, that billions have such limited access to this specific information. Now, the document leans heavily on biblical arguments for why this is so urgent.
Yeah.
What are some of the main scriptures he brings up?
Well, the big one, as you'd expect, is Matthew 28.11, the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations.
Right. Standard.
But Pitterl points out something important. The original Greek word there for nations is ethne.
Ethne.
Yeah, which apparently translates more closely to ethnic groups or people groups, tribes, not just modern political countries.
Okay, that's a significant difference.
Yeah.
So the command is more specific, reach these distinct cultural groups.
That's the argument. It implies a need for, tailored approaches. He also brings in John 3.16, God's love for the whole world, which must include the unreached. And Acts 10.34, God shows no favoritism, so everyone deserves a chance to hear.
Makes sense. Equal opportunity, in a way.
Right. And there's a compassion angle, too, from Jonah 4.1m about God's concern for those who metaphorically cannot tell their right hand from their left, those lacking understanding.
Compassion for the unaware. Yeah, that resonates.
And it keeps going. Isaiah 65.1, God revealing himself even to those who didn't ask. Luke 19.10, Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Matthew 24.14 mentions the gospel going to all ethne before the end comes.
So there's an end times connection argued there too.
Seems so. And then Romans 10, verses 14 and 15, lays out that logical chain. How can they believe if they haven't heard? How can they hear unless someone preaches? How can they preach unless they are sent?
Right, that sequence really highlights the need for someone to actually go.
Absolutely. It underlines the proactive part. Pitterl also uses the Apostle Paul as a key example.
Paul, how so?
Well, as a cross-cultural missionary who deliberately, according to Romans 15 and 2 Corinthians 10, prioritized preaching where Christ wasn't already known. He aimed for the frontiers, so to speak.
So there's a historical model within Christian scripture itself for focusing on these unreached areas.
That's the case being made.
Yeah.
And finally, he points to Revelation chapters 5 and 7 with these visions of people from every tribe, language, people, and nation worshiping.
A future vision of diversity.
Exactly. And the author sees the current existence of unreached groups as essentially the unfinished task of that Great Commission from Matthew 28 and Acts 1.8, the call to reach the ends of the earth.
Okay, so taken together, these scriptures paint a picture of a universal mission, targeting specific people groups with historical precedent and even future implications. Now, geographically, where are most of these unreached groups actually located?
The vast majority, according to the document and common missiological understanding, are in what's often called the 1040 window.
The 1040 window, can you describe that area?
Sure. It's a band across the globe stretching from North Africa through the Middle East and into South and East Asia. It lies roughly between 10 degrees and 40 degrees north latitude.
That's a huge swath of the planet. What about the people living there?
It's incredibly diverse, religiously speaking. Huge populations following Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and also many who identify as non-religious. And here's a sobering statistic. Something like 2/3 of the world's entire population lives in this window.
2/3? Wow.
Yeah, often including the world's poorest people. And they live on only about 1/3 of the Earth's landmass. So it's densely populated, often with significant poverty.
High population density, economic hardship, concentrated in this specific band. Is there any overlap with other global issues?
Yes, definitely. The document points out, using 2015 data, but it's still largely true, that this 1040 window overlaps significantly with areas where Christians face the most severe persecution.
Ah, right. So reaching these groups often means operating in places with active opposition or danger.
That's often the reality. It adds another layer of difficulty, beyond just logistics or language.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Okay, so given the location and the context, what are the main reasons cited in the document for why these groups lack access to the Christian message?
It's a mix of things, really. Spiritual opposition and persecution are mentioned as major factors. Then you have the obvious ones: language barriers, cultural differences that are hard to bridge.
Practical hurdles.
Very practical. Geographical challenges too, remote areas, difficult terrain, and just the sheer density of population in some places makes it hard to connect individually.
Sounds like a complex web of obstacles.
It is. The author also brings up what he calls imbalanced missionary trends, meaning where mission workers tend to go, and a related lack of specific gospel resources in these areas. But maybe the most fundamental reason highlighted is simply the lack of personal connection.
Personal connection.
Yeah. He cites a statistic which is pretty shocking that 86% of the world's Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists don't personally know a single Christian.
86%.
86%. So if faith often spreads through relationships, through seeing it lived out, and most people in these groups literally don't know anyone who identifies as Christian, well, you can see the problem.
That really drives home the importance of just presence. If there's no one there.
Exactly. The document uses this analogy of two fires.
Two fires.
Yeah. Imagine one burning building, maybe like an apartment block where there are lots of firefighters, hoses, people shouting warnings, lots of resources and hope. That's like the reached world. Then there's another fire, maybe further away, with hardly any help, few resources, less chance of rescue. That, the author says, is like the situation for unreached peoples regarding access to the gospel.
That's a powerful image.
It is. And the data used for that compared places like the U.S. with lots of Christian resources per capita to places like Pakistan or Bangladesh, showing a huge disparity in access to people who could share that message or provide resources like Bibles. For many in unreached areas, the analogy suggests they might never even hear the alarm, let alone know the way out.
That fire analogy really sticks with you. It highlights the disparity so clearly. Now, you mentioned imbalanced missionary trends. Can you unpack that a bit more based on the document?
Sure. The figures cited are pretty stark. It suggests that around 90% of Christian cross-cultural missionaries are actually working among the groups that are already considered reached, or at least have a significant existing Christian presence.
90%. So only 10% are focused on the unreached.
That's the statistic presented, based on research from around 2011 referenced in the text. It's a massive imbalance in where the personnel are going.
Wow. Why such a skew? What reasons does the document suggest?
Well, several things might feed into it. One idea is that short-term mission trips, which are very popular, often partner with existing long-term missionaries. And since most long-term folks are in reached areas, the short-term trips tend to reinforce that pattern. Also, historically and practically, it's often just been easier, maybe perceived as safer, to get visas and set up work in places that already have some Christian infrastructure. Unreached areas often come with more restrictions and opposition.
So it's kind of a feedback loop. Easier access leads to more workers, which makes access even easier there, while the harder places remain harder to get into.
That seems to be part of the dynamic described. And it's not just about people. The imbalance extends to resources too, like funding, evangelistic materials, Bibles, Christian literature.
So the materials follow the people, or lack thereof.
Pretty much. The document shows data comparing, say, the U.S. share of Christian workers or periodicals per capita versus nations in the 10-40 window. The difference is huge. Afghanistan, for example, is cited as having a minuscule proportional share of Christian periodicals available.
The data really paints a picture of, well, unequal distribution. It's not just a small difference. There's some impactful quotes about this in the document, right?
Yeah, a couple stand out. One from Dick Eastman is really provocative. He calculated, or cited a calculation, that the money spent globally on new church buildings could provide gospel booklets for every home on, I forget the exact number, but an almost unbelievable number of Earth-like planets.
That really makes you think about priorities, doesn't it?
It does. And then there's an older estimate from David Barrett back in 1997 suggesting that ministry in the 1040 window might be like 100 times, maybe even 1,000 times more cost-effective in terms of initial impact compared to ministry in the already heavily resourced West.
1,000 times.
Yeah.
That's a staggering claim about potential impact if resources were shifted.
It's definitely meant to provoke thought about strategy and stewardship.
So given this whole picture, the need, the biblical basis, the geographical concentration, the resource imbalance, the author argues strongly for readjusting priorities. How does he make that case?
He comes back to that fire analogy again, the burning building. Are we spending all our time shouting warnings to people on the first floor who've already heard the alarm multiple times, while people on the top floor haven't heard anything at all?
Right. Prioritizing those in most danger with the least information.
Exactly. And he uses other analogies too, like military strategy in WWI wasn't just about holding existing ground, it was about advancing into new territory. Or think about how we distribute hospitals or schools. The goal isn't just to pile them up where they already exist, but to ensure broader access, especially in underserved areas.
So it's a common sense principle applied to mission strategy.
That's the idea. He also mentions research by a missiologist named Justin Long, suggesting that there might actually be enough total evangelistic activity worldwide to potentially reach everyone.
Enough activity.
But it's heavily concentrated, aimed disproportionately at people who are already Christians or living in heavily Christianized cultures. The targeting is off, essentially.
So the issue isn't necessarily lack of total effort, but how that effort is directed.
That's a key point. The document also references the Lausanne Covenant from 1974. This was a major global gathering of evangelical leaders, and they explicitly called for prioritizing the unreached and even considering redirecting personnel and funds from heavily evangelized areas to unevangelized ones.
So this isn't a brand new idea Pitterlip is proposing.
Not at all. He's building on decades of missiological thinking. And the emphasis isn't just on needing more money everywhere, but specifically on needing obedient, visionary disciples committed to this task, especially in those unreached contexts.
A focus on committed people with the right vision, not just resources in general. The document even mentions a study trying to rank countries by gospel access.
Yeah, it refers to a study visually represented, kind of like a heat map, showing where access to the gospel is lowest. It's presented as a tool to help churches and individuals make more strategic decisions about where to focus their efforts for the Great Commission.
Okay, this all leads to the practical question, doesn't it? For someone listening, thinking, okay, I see the issue. What does the document suggest they can actually do? What are the practical ways to participate?
It lays out 6 main ways, drawing on a framework from OMF International. They are learn, pray, go, send, welcome, and mobilize.
Learn, pray, go, send, welcome, mobilize.
Okay. So learn means educating yourself about unreached peoples. Pray is huge. Praying strategically, maybe even daily, for specific groups. There are resources for that.
Like what?
Well, the Joshua Project website is highlighted. It has profiles of unreached groups, prayer calendars, even an Unreached People of the Day email you can sign up for. It makes praying very specific and informed.
Gotcha. So learn and pray, then go and send.
Right. Go obviously means considering becoming a cross-cultural missionary yourself, specifically to an unreached group. Send means supporting those who do go financially, prayerfully, logistically. This includes supporting specific missionaries or organizations focused on UPGs like Pioneers, OMF, Frontiers, Live Dead. Those are mentioned as examples. It also includes supporting things like Bible translation through groups like Wycliffe or gospel radio reaching remote areas.
Okay, so direct support for the frontline work. What about welcome and mobilize?
Welcome is about reaching out to people from unreached backgrounds who are now living among us, like international students or refugees. The document notes many international students, often from these very groups, never get invited into a local home during their entire stay.
That's an opportunity right on our doorstep, potentially.
Exactly. It's like being a missionary without leaving home, in a sense. And mobilize means helping others in your own community or church get involved, raising awareness, sharing what you've learned, maybe joining the church missions committee to advocate for focusing on the unreached.
So it covers a whole spectrum, from personal prayer and learning to direct involvement overseas or mobilizing others locally.
Yeah, the point is that everyone can do something. You don't have to move across the world, though some might. You can pray, give, welcome, learn, mobilize. It emphasizes taking some kind of concrete next step. Commit to praying for one group, start learning about them. There's a list of more specific ideas in the document itself.
It feels comprehensive and, importantly, actionable. It suggests that this isn't just for a select few super missionaries.
Definitely not. The underlying message of this deep dive into Pitterly's work is that there's this huge, urgent need among billions with little access, and that everyone who identifies with this faith tradition has a role, potentially, in addressing that need. It's presented as the unfinished task.
And it really leaves you pondering that question from Romans 10, doesn't it? How can people believe if they've never heard? And how can they hear unless someone is sent? It's a challenging thought to sit with.
It is. And just to cover all points from the source, the document does specifically mention and suggest considering support for global mission awareness and Leif Hetland's work, particularly in Pakistan, as an example of efforts focused on the unreached there. We should note, of course, that's a direct reference from the source itself.
Understood. A specific example cited by the author. Well, thank you for walking us through this document. It's clear the issue of unreached people groups is presented as both a massive challenge and, for those within this faith perspective, a really compelling call to action. We hope this deep dive gives you, our listeners, plenty to think about regarding your own response.